black waitress quietly warns Billionaire. His next move saves him $7 billion in seconds. The rain hammered against the windows of Savannah's bistro like angry fists demanding entry. Inside, the warm glow of amber lights cast dancing shadows across worn wooden tables, while the familiar symphony of clinking plates and hushed conversations filled the air. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that felt like it would never end. Ava Johnson's feet screamed inside her black slip-resistant shoes as she balanced 3 steaming plates along her left arm, while her right hand gripped a pitcher of ice water. Her uniform, a simple black dress with a white apron, had seen better days, much like everything else in her life. A small coffee stain near her collar told the story of her morning shift at the diner across town, the first of what would be a grueling double. "Table 7 needs more bread," called Marcus from behind the bar, his voice cutting through the dinner rush chaos. "And Table 3 is asking about their dessert order." Ava nodded, already calculating the steps in her head. "Deliver these plates to Table 12, refill water glasses at Table 5, grab bread from the kitchen, check on the chocolate soufflé for Table 3, and somehow find time to take the order from the couple who'd just been seated in her section." The mental choreography of survival. She moved with practiced efficiency, her body operating on autopilot, while her mind wandered to the stack of bills waiting on her kitchen counter. Rent was due in 3 days, and even with both jobs, she was still $200 short. The thought made her stomach clench, but she pushed it aside. There was no room for worry during the dinner rush. "Excuse me, miss?" An elderly man at table 4 raised his hand. "Could we get some more of that honey mustard sauce?" "Of course, sir. I'll be right back with that." Ava's smile was genuine despite her exhaustion. She'd learned early that kindness cost nothing, and in this business, it often made the difference between rent money and sleeping in her car. As she turned toward the kitchen, her reflection caught in the window, a young black woman with natural hair pulled back in a neat bun, tired eyes that still held flickers of determination, and shoulders that carried more weight than anyone her age should bear. At 28, Ava felt ancient some days. The kitchen was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Steam rose from sizzling pans while Chef Rodriguez called out orders in rapid-fire Spanish mixed with English. The heat hit Ava like a wall as she pushed through the swinging doors. "Honey mustard for Table 4. She called to Jenny, the prep cook, while grabbing the bread basket she needed. "Coming up, baby girl," Jenny replied without looking up from the grill. "You holding up okay? You look like death warmed over." Ava managed a tired laugh. "Just another glamorous night in paradise." But there was nothing glamorous about it. Not the grease-stained floors, not the demanding customers who left dollar tips on $50 bills, not the way her lower back ached from being on her feet for 14 hours straight. This was survival, pure and simple. She thought about her college friends sometimes, Sarah, who was now a marketing director in Atlanta, posting pictures of business lunches and weekend trips to wine country. Michael, who'd landed a job at a tech startup and bought his first house last year. They'd all started from the same place, but somehow life had scattered them like leaves in different directions. Not that Ava was bitter. Well, maybe a little. But mostly she was tired, bone deep, soul-crushing tired of fighting for every dollar, every opportunity, every moment of peace. The dinner crowd began to thin around 10:30, leaving behind empty tables littered with crumpled napkins and scattered crumbs. Ava worked methodically, clearing plates, wiping down surfaces, resetting tables for tomorrow's battles. The routine was oddly comforting, like a meditation that kept her hands busy while her mind could finally rest. "You've been quiet tonight," Marcus observed as he counted the register. "Everything all right?" Ava paused in her table wiping. Marcus was one of the good ones, a manager who actually cared about his staff, who remembered their names and asked about their lives. It made the job bearable on nights like this. "Just thinking," she said, then added with a wry smile. "Dangerous territory, I know. Tell me about it. Thinking never pays the bills." If only he knew how true that was. Ava had spent 4 years thinking her way through a business degree, thinking that education was her ticket out of places like this. She'd graduated summa cum laude with dreams of corner offices and expense accounts. Instead, she'd discovered that a degree without connections was just expensive paper, and connections weren't exactly something you could order off a menu. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, serving food to people who probably made her monthly salary in a single lunch meeting, invisible in her uniform, just another face in the service industry machine. But Ava had learned something valuable in these years of struggle. Resilience was a muscle, and hers had grown strong from constant use. Every dismissed job application, every condescending customer, every night she'd fallen asleep fully clothed because she was too exhausted to change, it had all forged something unbreakable inside her. As she folded napkins for the last few tables, Ava caught herself humming an old gospel song her grandmother used to sing while cooking Sunday dinner. Trouble don't last always. The lyrics went, and despite everything, some part of her still believed it. The last customers settled their bill around 11:15, leaving Ava to finish her closing duties in relative peace. She moved through the familiar routine, salt and pepper shakers filled, menus wiped clean, chairs stacked on tables for the morning cleaning crew. Each task brought her one step closer to home, one step closer to the brief respite before tomorrow's battles began again. But as she hung up her apron in the employee break room, Ava had no idea that this ordinary Tuesday night was about to become anything but ordinary. She couldn't know that in less than an hour, her life would intersect with forces far beyond her small corner of the world. She couldn't imagine that the skills she'd developed, observation, intuition, the ability to read people, would soon prove more valuable than any business degree. All she knew was that she was tired, her feet hurt, and she had just enough energy left to catch the last bus home. Tomorrow would bring another double shift, another day in the endless cycle of survival. She was wrong about tomorrow. But for now, in this moment of quiet exhaustion, Ava Johnson was still just a waitress finishing another ordinary shift, unaware that extraordinary was already walking through the front door. The bus ride home always gave Ava too much time to think. As the city lights blurred past the rain-streaked window, her mind inevitably drifted to the man who had shaped her understanding of corporate America, and then disappeared from her life entirely. Richard Johnson had been a different person back then, before the tailored suits and company cars. Ava remembered him coming home from his construction job with dirt under his fingernails and pride in his voice as he talked about the buildings rising from blueprints he'd helped review. He'd worked nights to put himself through business school, determined to give his daughter opportunities he'd never had. "Education is the key, baby girl," he used to say, helping her with homework at their small kitchen table. "Nobody can take that away from you." When Damien Coal Industries offered him a position as a mid-level executive, Richard had been over the moon. Finally, his hard work was paying off. The salary meant they could move to a better neighborhood, Ava could attend private school, and their future looked bright for the first time in years. But success came with a price Ava hadn't understood at 15. The transformation was gradual at first. Richard started working longer hours, his conversations peppered with corporate jargon and names of people Ava never met. He traded his old pickup truck for a leased BMW, bought expensive suits, and slowly began to inhabit a world that felt foreign to the man who used to take her fishing on Saturday mornings. "Your father's moving up in the world," her mother would say with forced cheerfulness when Richard missed another dinner, another school play, another moment that mattered. By the time Ava reached college, their relationship had become a series of polite conversations about grades and career prospects. Richard would lecture her about positioning herself strategically and building valuable networks, words that felt hollow coming from the man who used to tell her bedtime stories about brave princesses who saved themselves. The breaking point came during her senior year of college. Richard had arrived at her apartment unexpectedly, looking haggard and nervous in a way she'd never seen before. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his tie loose, his hands shaking as he poured himself a drink from her roommate's bottle of cheap vodka. "Dad, what's wrong?" Ava had asked, alarmed by his demeanor. Richard paced her tiny living room like a caged animal. "There are things happening at the company, Ava. Things that aren't right." His voice was barely above a whisper, as if he feared the walls themselves might be listening. What kind of things? He stopped pacing and looked at her with eyes full of regret. Financial irregularities. Deals being structured to benefit certain individuals while shareholders get screwed. I've been keeping records, trying to document everything, but… He trailed off, running his hands through his graying hair. Ava felt her stomach drop. Dad, you need to report this. Go to the SEC or… You don't understand. Richard's voice cracked with desperation. These people, they're not just colleagues, they're dangerous. I've seen what happens to whistleblowers in this industry. They get discredited, blacklisted, sometimes worse. So you're just going to stay quiet? Let them steal millions? The look Richard gave her was full of bitter disappointment. I've worked too hard to throw it all away for some misguided sense of justice. I have a mortgage, responsibilities. Your student loans to consider. That night marked the end of their relationship as Ava had known it. She'd stared at this man who looked like her father but spoke like a stranger, and realized that somewhere along the way, the construction worker with dirt under his fingernails had been replaced by a corporate puppet who valued security over integrity. I won't be part of this, Ava had said quietly. I won't take money that comes from looking the other way while people get hurt. Richard's face had hardened. Then you're naive, just like your mother was. The real world doesn't reward idealists, Ava. It chews them up and spits them out. Their last conversation had been even more devastating. Richard called her 3 weeks before graduation, his voice strangely calm. I'm taking early retirement, he announced without preamble. Early retirement? Dad, you're only 52. The company made me an offer I couldn't refuse. A generous severance package, full benefits, and a confidentiality agreement that ensures I'll never have to worry about money again. Ava felt sick. They bought your silence. They secured my future. Our future, if you'd stop being so stubborn. There is no our future, Dad. Not like this. The silence stretched between them for what felt like forever before Richard spoke again, his voice cold and unfamiliar. Then I guess we have nothing more to talk about. That was 6 years ago. Richard had moved to a gated community in Florida, sent her a Christmas card each year with a generic message and no return address. Ava had heard through distant relatives that he was living comfortably, playing golf, and never speaking about his corporate days. But she remembered everything he told her that night in her apartment. The names, the schemes, the intricate web of corruption that had eventually claimed her father's soul. She'd carried those memories like scars, reminders of what happened when good people chose comfort over conscience. Now, as the bus pulled up to her stop, Ava felt those old wounds aching in the rain. She'd built her life in defiance of everything Richard had become, choosing integrity over income, principles over position. It had cost her financially, but she could still look at herself in the mirror without flinching. She had no idea that in less than an hour, those painful memories would become the key to saving a billionaire's empire, and that the ghost of her father's betrayal would finally serve a purpose worth the years of heartbreak. Ava was wiping down the last table when the front door chimed at 11:47 p.m. She looked up, ready to politely inform the late arrivals that the kitchen was closed, but the words died in her throat. 3 men in expensive suits entered like they owned the world, which, in the case of the man in the center, wasn't far from the truth. Even in the dim lighting, Ava recognized him immediately. Damian Cole's face had graced enough magazine covers and business journals that he was unmistakable: sharp jawline, silver-streaked dark hair, and eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything they surveyed. Behind him followed 2 companions, one a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses clutching a leather briefcase, the other a broader figure who scanned the restaurant with the practiced eye of personal security. "We're actually closed," Marcus called from behind the bar, but his voice lacked its usual authority. Even he seemed to recognize they were in the presence of someone who didn't hear no very often. Damian Cole stepped forward, his movements fluid and confident. "I apologize for the late hour. We need a quiet place to discuss some business matters. I'll compensate you generously for staying open an additional hour." He pulled out his wallet, leather that probably cost more than Ava made in a month, and placed $500 bills on the nearest table. The gesture was casual, the way most people might leave a $5 tip. Marcus's eyes widened. "Of course, sir. Please take any table you'd like. Ava will take care of you." Ava felt her stomach flutter with nervousness as the three men chose a corner booth, the same table where the elderly couple had asked for extra honey mustard just 2 hours earlier. The contrast was surreal. This morning she'd served a construction worker his usual coffee and eggs, and now she was about to wait on one of the most powerful men in America. As they settled into the booth, Ava approached with menus and water glasses, trying to keep her hands steady. Up close, Damian Cole was both exactly what she'd expected and somehow different. The magazines captured his commanding presence, but they missed the slight tension around his eyes, the way his fingers drummed silently against the table. "Good evening," Ava said, her professional smile in place. "Can I start you gentlemen with some drinks?" "Coffee," Damian said without looking up from the papers his thin companion was spreading across the table. "Black. And we'll need privacy." "Of course." Ava moved to step away, but something caught her eye, a name on one of the documents spread across the table. Her heart nearly stopped. Vincent Marchetti. The name hit her like a physical blow, transporting her instantly back to that night in her college apartment, when her father had whispered secrets with shaking hands. Vincent Marchetti had been one of the names Richard mentioned, a man who specialized in creating financial structures that looked legitimate on the surface but funneled money to hidden beneficiaries. Ava forced herself to move normally as she walked to the coffee station, but her mind was racing. More details from that horrible night came flooding back: her father's description of shell companies, manipulated merger documents, and investors who thought they were buying into legitimate deals while their money disappeared into offshore accounts. As she prepared the coffee, she stole glances at the table. The three men were deep in conversation, their voices low but intense. She caught fragments. "20 billion, merger approval, signed tomorrow morning." And worst of all, Marchetti confirmed the documentation. Her hands trembled as she poured the coffee. This was exactly the kind of deal her father had described, a massive merger with doctored paperwork designed to benefit a select few while destroying the company and its shareholders. The same pattern that had turned her father from an honest man into a guilt-ridden shell of himself. When she returned to the table with the coffee, Damian glanced up at her for the first time. His eyes were a startling blue, intelligent and predatory. For a moment, Ava felt like he was seeing right through her uniform to something deeper. "Thank you," he said, and there was something in his tone, not dismissal, but not recognition either. To him, she was simply part of the scenery, invisible in the way service workers often were to the powerful. But Ava was far from invisible. As she set down his cup, she noticed more details on the documents: merger timelines, signature pages, and financial projections that made her stomach turn. $20 billion in assets being transferred through a web of companies that she now recognized from her father's confessions. The security man looked up sharply. "Ma'am, we need complete privacy for this discussion." "Of course," Ava replied, stepping back. But as she retreated to the bar area, her mind was spinning with implications. Damian Cole, a man whose business empire employed thousands of people, was about to sign documents that would destroy his own company. And he had no idea. She watched from across the restaurant as the three men continued their discussion, Damian's pen hovering over signature pages while his companions urged him to finalize everything before morning. The scene was surreal. In this modest bistro where she served comfort food to working-class families, a billionaire was about to make a decision that would cost him everything. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "These people, they're dangerous. But sometimes the victims don't even know they're being set up until it's too late." Ava gripped the edge of the bar counter, her knuckles white with tension. She could walk away, finish cleaning up, and pretend she'd never seen those documents. It would be the safe choice, the smart choice. After all, what did she owe Damian Cole? But as she watched him reach for his pen again, Ava realized this moment was bigger than her complicated feelings about wealth and power. This was about right and wrong, about the difference between her father's cowardice and the courage she'd spent 6 years trying to build within herself. The ghost of her father had brought her to this moment. Now she had to decide what to do with the knowledge that had haunted their family for years. Ava's heart hammered against her ribs as she pretended to organize menus at the hostess station, her eyes fixed on the corner booth. Damien Cole was leaning forward now, his expensive pen poised over what looked like the final signature page. The thin man with glasses, who she now realized was probably his lawyer, was pointing to specific lines, urging him to sign quickly. "The market opens in Tokyo in 6 hours," she heard the lawyer say. "If we don't finalize this tonight, the opportunity disappears." The security man nodded in agreement. "The Marchetti Group has been very clear about timing. They need confirmation before their board meeting at dawn." Ava felt sick. Her father's warnings echoed in her mind. They always create urgency. Rush the target so there's no time to think, no time to investigate. She watched Damien's face, searching for any sign that he sensed something was wrong. But he looked focused, determined, a man making what he believed was a calculated business decision. He had no idea he was signing his empire's death warrant. The rational part of Ava's mind screamed at her to stay quiet. This wasn't her business. These were powerful, dangerous people. Getting involved could cost her everything, her jobs, her safety, maybe even her life. Her father had chosen silence for good reasons. But then she thought about all the employees at Cole Industries who would lose their jobs when this fraudulent merger collapsed. The pension funds that would evaporate. The families who had invested their savings in a company they trusted. Her father's silence had protected him, but it hadn't protected anyone else. Ava grabbed a napkin and a pen from behind the hostess stand. Her hand shook as she wrote, the words barely legible in her rushed script. "Watch who signs the merger. One of them is selling you out." She stared at the message, her heart pounding so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. This was insane. She was a waitress about to slip a note to a billionaire, warning him about corporate fraud based on secrets her estranged father had shared 6 years ago. It sounded like something from a movie, not real life. But the documents on that table were real. The names were real. And if she was right, billions of dollars and thousands of jobs hung in the balance. Ava folded the napkin carefully and walked back toward the table, coffee pot in hand. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to move naturally, professionally. Just another waitress offering refills. "More coffee, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Please," Damien said absently, still studying the documents. As Ava leaned over to pour, she caught a glimpse of the merger terms. 20 billion in assets being transferred to a consortium of shell companies, exactly the structure her father had described. With movements that felt both deliberate and dreamlike, Ava set the coffee pot down and smoothly slid the folded napkin under Damien's water glass. Her fingers brushed against the expensive crystal for just a moment before she stepped back. "Will there be anything else?" she asked. The lawyer looked up impatiently. "No, we're fine. We really do need privacy for this." But Damien had noticed the napkin. His eyes flicked to it, then up to Ava's face. For a moment that felt like eternity, their gazes locked. Ava saw intelligence in those blue eyes, and something else, a flicker of curiosity, maybe even recognition that she wasn't just part of the background. "Actually," Damien said slowly, his hand moving toward the napkin, "could you bring us some of those small spoons? For the sugar." "Of course," Ava replied, though there were already spoons on the table. As she walked away, her legs nearly gave out. She'd done it. Whether it would make any difference, whether he'd even read the note, or just throw it away, that was out of her hands now. But she'd acted on the knowledge her father had been too afraid to use. From behind the bar, she watched Damien discreetly unfold the napkin under the table. His expression didn't change, but she saw his posture stiffen slightly. The pen in his hand stopped moving. "Is everything all right, Mr. Cole?" the lawyer asked. Damien looked up, his face carefully neutral. "I'm just reviewing one more time. A $20 billion deal deserves careful consideration." Sir, we've reviewed this extensively, the security man said. Every document has been verified. Marchetti's team has been working on this for months. Months? Damien repeated thoughtfully. Yes, I'm sure they have. Ava held her breath as she watched the subtle shift in dynamics. Damien was stalling now, asking questions about details that seemed routine just minutes before. The lawyer and security man exchanged glances, their earlier confidence replaced by barely concealed irritation. The markets won't wait, the lawyer pressed. Tokyo, then London, then New York. By tomorrow afternoon, this opportunity will be gone forever. But Damien was no longer rushing. Ava saw him glance toward the kitchen, toward her, with eyes that held a mixture of suspicion and something that looked almost like hope. He was a man who had built an empire on reading people and situations, and something in that brief moment of eye contact had convinced him to listen to a waitress's warning. I think, Damien said carefully, setting down his pen, we should review the Marchetti documentation one more time before I sign anything. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Damien Cole's fingers drummed against the table as he studied the merger documents with newfound scrutiny, while his two companions shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Actually, Damien said, his voice deceptively casual, I'd like to make a quick call to verify some details with our Hong Kong office. Just routine due diligence. The lawyer's jaw tightened. Sir, it's nearly dawn in Hong Kong. This really can't wait. It can wait 5 minutes. Damien cut him off, his tone brooking no argument. He pulled out his phone and stepped away from the table, moving toward the restaurant's front window. Ava watched from behind the bar as Damien made what appeared to be several calls, his voice too low to hear but his body language increasingly tense. After the third call, he stood perfectly still for a long moment, staring out at the rain-soaked street. When he returned to the table, something fundamental had changed. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by the cold calculation of a predator who had just realized he was being hunted. Interesting, Damien said, settling back into his seat. I just spoke with our chief financial officer. Apparently, there's no record of Marchetti Industries in our approved vendor database. Strange, considering they're supposed to be our primary merger partner. The security man cleared his throat. That must be an oversight in the system. You know how these databases can be. Perhaps. I also called our legal department. They have no record of approving these merger terms. Damien's eyes were ice cold now. Most interesting of all, I called Vincent Marchetti directly. Imagine my surprise when his assistant informed me that Mr. Marchetti is currently in federal custody, arrested 3 days ago for securities fraud. The color drained from both men's faces. The lawyer fumbled with his briefcase, while the security man's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his jacket, a motion that Damien caught instantly. I wouldn't, Damien said quietly. The police are already on their way. You don't understand, Mr. Cole, the lawyer said desperately. This deal, the timing, everything depends on stealing $20 billion from my company? Damien's voice was deadly calm. On using forged documents to transfer assets to accounts you control? On betting that I'd be too trusting to verify what my oldest friends were asking me to sign? The word friends hit like a physical blow. Ava realized with a start that these weren't random criminals. These were people Damien had trusted, possibly for years. The betrayal ran deeper than simple corporate fraud. How long? Damien asked. How long have you been planning this? The security man, who Ava now understood was probably Damien's head of security, someone with access to everything, finally spoke. 2 years. Ever since the Singapore expansion created those offshore accounts. It was too easy. $20 billion, Marcus. $20 billion. Damien shook his head in what looked like genuine grief. I trusted you with my life. I was godfather to your daughter. Marcus, the security man, couldn't meet Damien's eyes. I'm sorry. I really am. But the opportunity, we never meant for it to go this far. You never meant to get caught. Damien corrected. The sound of sirens cut through the night air, growing closer. The lawyer made a desperate lunge for the documents, but Damien was faster, sweeping the papers away from his reach. "It's over," Damien said simply. As the police led his former associates away in handcuffs, Damien sat alone in the booth, looking older than when he'd walked in. The weight of betrayal seemed to have aged him years in the span of an hour. Marcus had paused at the restaurant door, turned back to Ava. "I don't know how you knew," he said quietly, "but thank you." Those two weren't planning to stop with the company. They had plans for me too, once I'd served my purpose. When the police finally left, the restaurant fell into an eerie quiet. Damien remained at the table, staring at the documents that would have destroyed everything he'd built. Ava approached carefully, still hardly believing what had just unfolded. "I suppose I owe you an explanation," Damien said without looking up. Ava's throat felt dry. "Actually, I think I owe you one." For the first time since the police arrived, Damien smiled, a tired, grateful expression that transformed his entire face. "I'm listening." Ava took a deep breath. "My father used to work for your company. Richard Johnson. He knew about these kinds of schemes. He tried to warn me once, years ago, about how they work. The shell companies, the rush signatures, the way they create artificial urgency." Recognition flickered in Damien's eyes. Richard Johnson. Mid-level executive, early retirement about 6 years ago. He was a good man. Quiet, honest, thorough in his work. He was, Ava said softly. Until he wasn't anymore. The corporate world, it changed him. Or maybe it just revealed who he really was underneath. Damien studied her face with newfound interest. "And you recognized the pattern tonight?" "I recognized the names. The way they were pushing you to sign. My father described exactly this kind of setup." Ava felt tears threatening. He was too scared to act on what he knew. "I couldn't live with myself if I made the same choice." The ghost of her father had finally served a purpose, not the corruption he'd hidden from, but the knowledge he'd shared in a moment of desperate honesty 6 years ago. 3 weeks later, the financial world was still reeling from the coal industry's scandal. Headlines screamed about the billionaire's narrow escape and the $20 billion betrayal. But none of them mentioned the waitress who had prevented the crime of the century with a hastily scribbled note. Ava preferred it that way. She'd watched the news coverage from her small apartment, seeing Damien Cole's composed face at press conferences as he announced the exposure of the conspiracy and the arrests of Marcus Webb and attorney David Chin. The investigation had revealed a network of corruption that reached into multiple corporations, with her father's old warnings proving prophetic in ways she'd never imagined. Now she stood outside the gleaming coal industry's tower, clutching the business card Damien had left with Marcus, the night manager. The message on the back was simple: tomorrow, 2 p.m. 47th floor. We need to talk. The elevator ride felt like ascending into another world. By the time the doors opened onto the executive floor, Ava's hands were sweating despite the building's perfect climate control. Everything screamed wealth and power: marble floors, original artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the entire city. Damien's assistant, a polished woman in her 50s, led Ava through a maze of corridors to an office that was larger than her entire apartment. Damien stood behind his desk, but this wasn't the exhausted man from the restaurant. This was the billionaire CEO in his element, commanding, confident, and very much in control. "Ava," he said, gesturing to the chairs across from his desk. "Thank you for coming." She sat carefully, hyper-aware of her simple dress and discount store shoes in this palace of corporate power. "I wasn't sure you'd really want to see me again." Damien smiled, the same tired but grateful expression she remembered from that night. "You saved my company. More than that, you saved my life. Marcus wasn't planning to let me survive once the money was transferred." He paused, his voice growing quiet. "The FBI found very detailed plans about making my death look like an accident." The revelation hit Ava like a physical blow. She'd known the corruption was serious, but murder? I had no idea it was that bad. Neither did I, until it was almost too late. Damien moved around his desk, leaning against its edge in a gesture that made him seem more human, less intimidating. I've been thinking a lot about that night. About why you risked everything to warn a stranger. Ava looked out the massive windows at the city below. My father spent 6 years carrying the weight of his silence. I saw what that knowledge did to him, how it ate away at everything good inside him until there was nothing left but guilt and fear. I couldn't live with that same burden. Your father, Damien said thoughtfully. I remember Richard well. He was one of the few people who always told me the truth, even when it wasn't what I wanted to hear. When he took early retirement, I wondered if something had happened. Something did happen. He discovered the same kind of corruption you almost fell victim to, but he chose to stay quiet. It destroyed our relationship and turned him into someone I barely recognized. Damien nodded slowly. I've spent the last 3 weeks rebuilding my security protocols, investigating every deal, every partnership, every person I trusted. It's exhausting work, but necessary. I need people around me who will ask hard questions, who won't be bought or intimidated. He walked to his window, hands clasped behind his back. I also need someone who can see what others miss. Someone who understands how corruption works from the inside, who recognizes the patterns and warning signs. Ava felt her heart begin to race. What are you saying? I'm offering you a job, Ava. Director of Corporate Integrity. You'd work directly with me, reviewing all major deals, investigating potential fraud, ensuring that what happened 3 weeks ago never happens again. The office fell silent except for the muted sounds of traffic far below. Ava stared at Damien, hardly believing what she was hearing. You want to hire a waitress for a corporate executive position? I want to hire the woman who saw through a $20 billion fraud scheme when my entire board of directors missed it. His voice was firm, certain. You have a business degree, real-world experience reading people, and most importantly, integrity that can't be bought. Ava thought about her father, about the choice that had defined the last 6 years of her life. She thought about the endless double shifts, the aching feet, the constant worry about rent money. But mostly, she thought about the moment when she decided to slip that note under a stranger's water glass. There's something you should know, she said quietly. I'll never be the kind of person who stays quiet when something's wrong. I won't be diplomatic about corruption or gentle with people who abuse their power. Damien's smile was radiant. That's exactly why I need you. Standing in that gleaming office, looking out over a city that had once seemed impossibly distant from her small world, Ava felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about leaving the restaurant, or even about the job. This was about the kind of person she'd chosen to become in defiance of her father's example. When do I start? She asked. Monday morning. There's a pharmaceutical merger I want you to review. Something about the paperwork doesn't feel right. As Ava shook Damien's hand, she realized that her father's betrayal had finally come full circle. His silence had cost him everything that mattered, but his knowledge, shared in a moment of desperate honesty, had given her the power to save thousands of jobs and billions in investments. Sometimes the children do get to rewrite their parents' stories. Sometimes courage wins over comfort, and integrity triumphs over fear. Walking out of that tower, Ava Johnson was no longer just a waitress who had warned a billionaire. She was the woman who would help him rebuild an empire on the foundation her father should have laid years ago: truth, courage, and the unshakable belief that doing right matters more than being safe.